The morning fog clung to the streets of Prague like a burial shroud, and Special Agent Sarah Chen knew with cold certainty that someone was following her. She had noticed the same weathered face in 3 different reflections over the past hour: a shop window, the side mirror of a parked car, and, now, in the grimy surface of a bus stop advertisement. In her 5 years with the CIA's Directorate of Operations, she had developed an almost supernatural awareness of surveillance, and every instinct she possessed was screaming danger. Sarah quickened her pace along Wenceslas Square, weaving through the early morning crowd of commuters and tourists. Her cover as a freelance journalist had served her well during her 18 months in Eastern Europe, providing the perfect excuse to ask questions, travel frequently, and maintain contact with sources across the intelligence spectrum. But covers, no matter how carefully constructed, had expiration dates. And hers, she realized with growing dread, might have just expired. The mission that had brought her to Prague was delicate beyond measure. Chinese intelligence operatives had been making inroads throughout Eastern Europe, exploiting the region's complex relationship with both NATO and Russia. Sarah's job was to identify key Chinese assets and, where possible, turn them into double agents working for American interests. It was painstaking work that required building trust over months, sometimes years. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and entire networks could collapse like dominoes. 3 blocks from her apartment, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of heading home where she might be cornered, she ducked into the ornate lobby of the Grand Hotel Europa. The 100-year-old establishment was a maze of corridors, service elevators, and forgotten passages that had served countless spies and dissidents over the decades. If she was going to disappear, this was the place to do it. Moving with practiced efficiency, Sarah made her way to the hotel's business center and accessed one of the public computers. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she activated emergency protocols that had been drilled into her during training at the farm, the CIA's secretive facility in Virginia. Dead drop locations were confirmed. Extraction procedures were reviewed. Most importantly, she sent a coded message to her handler, Marcus Webb, using a system so mundane that hostile intelligence services consistently overlooked it. A book review posted to a popular consumer website. The review, ostensibly for a cookbook titled Eastern European Delights, contained a carefully crafted message that would alert Webb to her compromised status. But, as she typed the final words, Sarah made a choice that violated every rule in the CIA handbook. Instead of requesting immediate extraction, she indicated her intention to go dark, to disappear completely and continue the mission under deep cover without any support from Langley. It was a decision born of both professional calculation and personal obsession. Over the past 6 months, Sarah had identified what she believed to be the early stages of a massive Chinese intelligence operation, something far more significant than mere asset recruitment. Documents she had photographed, conversations she had overheard, and patterns she had observed all pointed to a coordinated effort that could destabilize the entire region. But she needed more time to understand the full scope of the operation, time that wouldn't be available if she went through official extraction procedures and debriefing processes. As she submitted the book review and erased her digital footprints, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the computer screen. At 34, she still looked younger than her years, a genetic gift that had served her well in the field. Her parents had emigrated from Taiwan when she was 3, bringing with them the linguistic skills and cultural understanding that had made her invaluable to American intelligence efforts in Asia. But those same advantages had also made her a target. Chinese intelligence services were always looking for ethnic Chinese Americans to recruit or eliminate, depending on their assessment of potential value. The irony wasn't lost on her. In attempting to infiltrate Chinese operations, she had become exactly the kind of asset that Beijing's spy masters would most want to acquire or neutralize. Her ethnicity, her access, and her knowledge made her simultaneously valuable and vulnerable. It was a calculus she had always understood intellectually, but the weight of it was pressing down on her now like a physical force. Leaving the hotel through a service entrance that emerged onto a narrow alley, Sarah began the process of becoming someone else entirely. The identity she chose wasn't one of the official legends that the CIA had prepared for her. Instead, she reached back to her childhood, to family stories and half-remembered details about distant relatives who had scattered across Asia during the tumultuous decades of the 20th century. She would become Li Wei, a translator and researcher with family connections in multiple countries, someone whose presence in various locations could be explained by academic pursuits and family obligations. The transformation required more than just a new name and backstory. Over the next 72 hours, Sarah systematically dismantled her old life. Bank accounts were emptied and closed. Apartments were abandoned. Personal effects that couldn't be safely destroyed were left behind. Most painfully, she broke off contact with everyone she cared about, including David Park, the State Department attaché she had been quietly dating for 8 months. The psychological toll of such complete disconnection was something that no amount of training could fully prepare an agent for. Sarah had read reports from deep-cover operatives who had emerged from long-term assignments suffering from various forms of identity confusion and emotional detachment. But understanding the risks intellectually was different from experiencing the reality of watching her entire existence simply evaporate. In her final act as Sarah Chen, she visited the small cemetery where her grandmother was buried. The old woman had died during Sarah's sophomore year at Georgetown, but not before sharing stories about life in China before the revolution, about family members who had disappeared into the chaos of war and political upheaval. Those stories had inspired Sarah's choice to join the CIA, driven by a desire to protect the freedoms that her family had sacrificed so much to achieve. Standing before the weathered headstone, Sarah whispered a promise in Mandarin that she would return when her mission was complete. Then, she walked away from everything she had ever been and stepped into the shadows of a world where truth was a luxury that could get you killed, and survival depended on becoming a ghost among ghosts. The transition wasn't immediate. For the first few weeks, Sarah moved carefully through a network of safe houses and temporary accommodations, using skills learned during training to establish new documentation and create the digital footprint that Li Wei would need to function in the modern world. The process required calling in favors from assets she had cultivated over her years in Europe, people who owed their freedom or their lives to American intelligence but who were now being asked to help someone who officially no longer existed. Marcus Webb, her handler back at Langley, faced his own crisis as reports began filtering in about Sarah's disappearance. Security cameras at the Grand Hotel Europa showed her entering the building, but she was never seen leaving. Her apartment showed signs of hasty departure but no evidence of violence or struggle. Most troubling of all was the book review he had found, the coded message that seemed to indicate she had chosen to disappear rather than being kidnapped or killed. The implications were staggering. If Sarah had been captured by hostile intelligence services, the damage to ongoing operations could be catastrophic. But, if she had voluntarily gone rogue, the potential for compromise was even worse. Either way, Webb faced the unenviable task of determining whether Agent Sarah Chen was a victim, a traitor, or something else entirely. Within 48 hours of her disappearance, a damage assessment team had been assembled at CIA headquarters. Led by Deputy Director Catherine Morse, the team included counterintelligence specialists, psychological profilers, and regional experts who began the painstaking process of determining what Sarah might have known and who might have been affected by her disappearance. The assessment was classified at the highest levels, with access restricted to fewer than a dozen individuals. What they discovered was deeply troubling. Sarah's access to sensitive information had been broader than anyone had realized. Her work identifying Chinese assets had given her insight into American intelligence capabilities throughout Eastern Europe. Her linguistic abilities had made her a valuable asset in multiple operations beyond her primary mission. Most concerning of all was her documented history of pushing boundaries, taking risks that had paid off but that suggested a willingness to operate outside official parameters. The psychological profile that emerged painted a picture of an agent who was brilliant, dedicated, and potentially unstable. Her family history included relatives who had been involved in resistance movements during World War II and the Chinese Civil War. Her academic background included studies in international relations and Chinese history that had given her a sophisticated understanding of geopolitical dynamics. Her CIA training record showed exceptional performance in all areas except one, accepting limitations on operational autonomy. As weeks turned to months with no contact from Sarah, the official assessment gradually shifted from missing in action to presumed dead. A memorial service was held at CIA headquarters, attended by colleagues who knew her only by her cover identities and family members who were told she had died in a car accident while working as a journalist in Eastern Europe. The lies were necessary, but they added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Meanwhile, halfway across Europe, Li Wei was beginning to establish herself in the shadowy world of Chinese intelligence operations. The transformation had been more complete than even Sarah had anticipated. Speaking perfect Mandarin and carrying documentation that would pass all but the most sophisticated scrutiny, she had managed to gain access to circles that had been completely closed to her previous identity. The information she was gathering was extraordinary, but she had no way to communicate it to Langley without compromising her new identity. The isolation was overwhelming. Cut off from all support systems and living under constant threat of discovery, Sarah began to understand why so many deep cover operatives eventually suffered psychological breaks. The human mind wasn't designed to sustain such complete deception for extended periods. Every conversation required careful calculation. Every relationship was a potential threat. Every moment of the day demanded perfect performance in a role that could never be abandoned. But the intelligence she was gathering made the sacrifice worthwhile. Chinese operations in Eastern Europe were far more extensive than anyone at CIA had imagined. What had appeared to be isolated recruitment efforts were actually components of a coordinated campaign to establish influence networks that could be activated in times of crisis. The implications for European security were staggering, and Sarah realized she was witnessing the early stages of what could become a complete transformation of the geopolitical landscape. As her first year as Li Wei drew to a close, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her mission. Rather than attempting to contact her handlers with preliminary intelligence, she would go deeper into the Chinese networks. The risks were enormous, but the potential payoff could prevent conflicts that would cost millions of lives. She was walking into the heart of darkness with no backup, no support, and no guarantee that she would ever be able to return to the world she had left behind. In the shadowy world of international espionage, agents disappear all the time. Some defect. Some die. Some simply vanish without a trace, becoming ghosts in the machine of global intelligence. But what happens when one of those ghosts suddenly materializes 3 years later, walking through the front doors of CIA headquarters with information so explosive it could reshape the balance of world power? This is the extraordinary true story of Agent Sarah Chen, a woman who was presumed dead by her own government, mourned by her family, and written off as another casualty of the intelligence wars. For 3 years, she lived in the shadows of hostile territory, playing the most dangerous game imaginable, pretending to be someone else while gathering secrets that would ultimately save countless lives and prevent a conflict that could have plunged the world into chaos. What you're about to read isn't fiction. It's the declassified